All right, everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Family Movie Time podcast. I'm your host, Jeff M. Giordano, and we have an exciting film. This is a G-rated film, G-rated. We got Star Trek: The Motion Picture from 1979, and my special guest today is Joe Benavides, an old friend of mine. We worked on several films together way back. Um, Joe has a philosophy background. He's always been a deep thinker and intellectual, always interested in the arts and culture and history, all the deep stuff in life, the existential stuff. Um, so, Joe, I'll give you the mic if you want to say anything else about yourself, and then we will jump into talking about the film. All right, I'll give you the mic.
Uh, sure. I don't know where exactly you want to start. I mean, I wouldn't say I have an existential bent. I would say I have more of a romantic bent. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I don't want to go too far into myself right off the jump. I mean, I would assume you have a question or something.
I do. With this particular film, I'm going to just say my favorite scene. We could start there. Is the wormhole scene, which almost has like a psychedelic, or we're all of a sudden in this adventure. Their voices even slow down in that scene. The lighting. Um, It's just, is that your favorite scene, or is there another moment in the movie that you would single out?
Oh, I don't mean to cut you off, and I do love that scene because it is so Willy Wonka. It is so crazy. However, it's not for me as a like my mother, for example, was a huge Trekkie. Like I grew up with Star Trek. So for me, like I do love that scene, and cinematically, it is very interesting. And there are other things about Star Trek, the motion picture, that I would want to praise. I would praise the score. I would say visually, overall, it's beautiful. But as I was rewatching it, the most conspicuous thing to me was that the wardrobe is so weird. Like, it's bizarre.
How does it, for those not as familiar, how did the wardrobe change from the television series to this film? If you could describe
Well,
that for those.
you don't have the colors anymore. Like in normal, actually in every other Star Trek, I think, you have colors. Where in old Star Trek, it was like Kirk would wear gold, blue was for science, and what's the other one? It's it's blue, gold, oh, and red. Red in old Star Trek was for like engineering and stuff. You know, in later Star Trek, they changed the colors such that red is for command, gold is for like engineering, blue is still for science. In the motion picture, everyone is just wearing beige and like blue for some reason, like this like very like light blue. Like it's weird. So you kind of don't really know who anyone is. It's kind of disorienting. Like if you're used to Star Trek.
I did find, I'll share quickly, and then let you continue speaking, some trivia, some fun facts. Apparently, the cast did not like the uniforms, and they required assistants to be removed. Particularly, William Shatner started to wear a corset in the 1970s, and the lines of which can
I've
be
heard this.
underneath
Yes.
his uniform in certain scenes. One of the cast's conditions for returning in a sequel to this film was to have new uniforms, which led to the creation of the red tunic uniforms seen later in the films.
Mm. So yeah, there's that. But to go back to the wormhole thing, because I agree with you, it's one of the more like on its own, one of the more fascinating scenes. Uh, but I would say it's like it's that and it's a tie. There's a tie with it's either that or it's when Spock is going through in a spacesuit through, the through V'ger, through the big thing, through the various things. And then they have to go get him back. That sequence, I think, ties for the most interesting sequences.
I want to include
I
Gene.
mean, just visually
Yeah,
speaking, really.
yes. Um, Maybe we could take some time to talk about Gene Roddenberry, the brain, the idea for the show essentially came from Gene Roddenberry, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's the genesis of the whole thing. Um, you know, like I said, my mother was a huge Trekkie, and I grew up in Prague. She was in the Peace Corps, and you couldn't watch Star Trek on television because it just wasn't available. So every now and then we would get this shipment of VHS tapes. And then my mom would be like, okay, now it's time to make popcorn. And we know what we're doing this evening. And these were mostly episodes of Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, is what we would do. But I mean, also sometimes like one of them was the motion picture. One of them was the motion picture. Another one was for the voyage home, which is much sillier. Which is much sillier. But I also have great affection for it. But anyway, so I have this very like emotional attachment to Star Trek. And it's mostly just the idea that it's very simple, really. It's that the human species can improve, can be better. And like, here's how it could be better. If there was stuff like we didn't have money, or if like it didn't matter if you were a different species. Like in that way, I think it's a very inspirational thing.
What were your mother's favorite, series or episodes or films? Did she kind of return to certain Star Trek things over the years?
I don't. She was actually kind of agnostic on this. She would just sort of just cycle through it. She didn't really have favorites, or if she did, she never really told me about it.
As far as the technology that it seems like Star Trek predicted, like, smart watches, they're talking into their watch, they're communicating with somebody somewhere else.
Yeah,
voice
no,
act.
totally. I mean, Star
Yeah.
Trek anticipated like the flip phone with the communicator, at least in the original series. That's how they did it.
Um, do you think we'll live to see the way they would beam me up, Scotty, beaming people to different places? Is that something that is
Oh
likely?
my God. I like, well, like I kind of really hope they do. I sort of hope they don't. I mean, for example, like in the motion picture, it's one of the first scenes. They have that scene where they beam someone up and it's like a horrible disaster and they just get disintegrated. You know, the idea of having all of your molecules scrambled seems pretty horrible. Uh However, if it worked, it would be pretty cool.
Um,
The one thing that I think would be really good if they could actually ever do it would be, and this actually does not exist in the motion picture, but in like next generation and later iterations, it does. Would be the replicator. Could I have a cup of tea? Could I have a bowl of risotto? Could I have a bag of Doritos? And it could just make them. That would be cool.
what else do you think it says about, warfare or life on other planets or life in other universes or galaxies?
Well, I don't know anything about life on other planets or in other galaxies. It does strike me though that there is a little bit of hypocrisy in Star Trek, which is that what comes up, and this does not happen in the motion picture. We're not talking about the motion picture anymore, but in DS9 this totally happens. In the next generation, this sort of happens. It's that this idea of universalism, uh, will come to your planet, you know, like so long as you follow the prime directive, right? You know, so long as we're not interfering with like a pre-warp civilization, then our goal basically is to bring you into the Federation. And this kind of project of assimilating other civilizations into your culture and to your civilization is, well, it's just a little, it gives me pause.
And
Well, it
you,
doesn't really give me pause because Star Trek doesn't actually exist. But you know what I'm saying.
yeah, and you say the word that it's hypocritical because in earlier iterations of Star Trek, it's the opposite, basically. Is that what you're saying?
Well, in earlier, I mean, in like the original like Star Trek, when it's just like Captain Kirk flying around. Uh Basically they're just going on science missions, right? I mean, like they're looking at like astronomical phenomena and stuff. Later on in Star Trek, the ambition of like, Starfleet, the Federation in general, is to expand the Federation itself. I'm sorry, this is probably very boring.
No, no, it's I appreciate your I didn't watch Star Trek growing up, so I, revisited all the films, about 4 years ago. I decided to I'd seen some of them over the years, but I was like, let me just watch them all. So I watched all the movies they had made. I haven't seen all the various series over the years. The original, I probably watched the most episodes. Um, I personally find the world they create, it's very fascinating. And to get back to Star Trek the motion picture, the main topic today, um rewatching it again before speaking with you today, there's so much admirable filmmaking in the lighting, the
Oh,
production
it's
design,
beautiful.
the sound effects, the music, the lighting effects. Um, so much happens inside the ship that you're convinced that they're responding to, whether it's the wormhole or they're being attacked. There's some kind of electrical, I don't know how to describe it, lightning, light flashes, energy fields. Um,
You're absolutely right. It's great.
and then later on, there's similar
I mean, I
encounters.
would say
Go ahead. Yeah.
one thing that I noticed looking at it is it's before that happens. It's when it's it's Kirk and Mr. Scott, and they're in the shuttle, and they're going to the Enterprise, and you get this long sequence. They really take their time. They really take their time because clearly, like they're all practical effects. Well, I think something in the wormhole thing, I think maybe that's very early digital stuff. But pretty much everything else is all practical. So like keep in mind, the ship is a model and it's a really big model and it looks so good. And when you get into the ship, I mean, they make the interior of the ship actually look big, which is an amazing thing. I was really impressed by that watching it again. I was like, this looks like a very big place, you know, which it should be. I mean, it's the flagship of the Federation.
I want to touch on the pacing real quick while you mentioned it just now. Shatner himself, when he first saw the finished film at a screening, his initial response was, "Oh my goodness, um, this movie moves really slow and sluggishly. Like the pace is just like, you know, glacial. Like people are not going to like this. This is not going to do well at the box office. People aren't going to go see this in the movie theater." And then he was wrong.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how did it actually do at box office? I don't. I think it did fairly well. That's why they made a second one. But I was thinking, I mean, the example I was going to draw is, I mean, it is kind of like 2001 bumping into Star Trek. Like that's kind of what this movie is.
And then you have, you know, for better or worse, I'll say you have all the merchandise tie-ins. I think from what I read, some research, like the first Happy Meal toy was a Star Trek related toy. So it's like, I don't know, maybe that's
Of
ironic.
what?
It's ironic with the films. Is that consistent with the values presented in the film? I don't know. Is that a fair question?
Of what? Like of Captain Kirk? Like
I'm not sure. The toy, I could try to look it up.
no,
Um,
it's not important. It's not important. Whatever it is, it's just going to make me sad.
um, it was. I mean, apparently it was met with mixed reviews from critics. Um,
It was. A lot of people said that it was way too slow. That it was like ponderous or whatever. Um,
yeah.
but I mean, it also had the like counter response of like, no, this actually has there's something going on.
So I'm gonna read
I mean,
now.
there are pacing things that are weird. I mean,
Yeah.
I noticed that it's strange how long it takes for Spock to show up.
Yeah.
My favorite entrance, though, my favorite entrance is and oh my God. Okay, now I'm thinking of other things that I like. My favorite entrance is when Dr. McCoy shows up. And he's got this leisure suit and he's got this like chain. Like he looks like a 70s like swinger or something. And he's got this like giant beard, you know, because basically he's been drafted and he's pissed off that he's there in the first place. You know, it's kind of the same. Like Spock also doesn't 100% want to be there, you know, but he's there too. But they all click together because the whole story of that thing is it doesn't really matter what the plot is. It's really a character thing with Captain Kirk, McCoy, and Spock. The other ones matter too, of course, but it's those three that really matter. But my favorite is his entrance in a leisure suit. And he's just really pissed off. He's like, "This was your idea, wasn't it?"
So just to clarify, the opening of the film in the US and Canada was December 7th, 1979, 857 theaters. It set a box office record for the highest opening weekend gross, making it 11,926 in the first weekend. The film beat the 3-day weekend record set by Superman 1978, just a year before, of 10.4 million in its third weekend.
That's
but
pretty
not but
good.
but not its 4-day weekend gross of 13 million. And the opening weekend gross of the 1978 reissue of Star Wars of 10 million. So basically, motion picture earned 17 million within a week. And then at its
Oh, and
widest,
that's kind of why they made it, right? They made it as a response to Star Wars. Yeah.
and I think also Close Encounters of the Third Kind had some influence as well.
Yeah.
So at its
Yeah,
widest
no, I think
domestic,
so, especially with like the big alien ship that like makes weird noises and has lights. I mean, that's what like the last act of the motion picture
yes.
is very close to Close Encounters.
So, at its widest domestic distribution, Star Trek Motion Picture was shown in 1,002 theaters. It grossed 82 million in the U.S., making it the fifth highest grossing film of 1979 in the U.S. Overall, worldwide, the film grossed $139 million. And then it would go on to be nominated for 3 Academy Awards for Best Art Direction, Best Visual Effects, and Best Original Score.
Yeah, all merited. Yeah.
We're about halfway through.
However, the costumes are still really weird.
Yeah, it was not nominated for costume for
No.
Academy Awards in 1979. um, what about the characters overall? Like, which characters from when you first started watching Star Trek universe as a kid, are there any certain characters that you related to or you would want to, see them, you identify with them some way?
Um, yeah, actually, this would be kind of a departure from the motion picture because I actually didn't see the motion picture until I was older. When I was a kid, I grew up watching Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. And in Deep Space Nine, I always loved the. Have you ever seen this? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I've seen some episodes of Deep Space Nine, but not very much, honestly.
Okay, because I always loved Garrick, who's the Cardassian tailor who no one knows if he's a spy or not. And he's just like he's the guy from Hellraiser. He's the dad, and it's Andrew Robinson.
Okay.
It's the same actor. Anyway, he's just like very charismatic, and I was like, I like this character. I like this character. Um, I mean, there are others. I mean, like it's easy to like, to like Captain Picard. That's easy. Um, like it's easy to like Commander Riker. That's easy. On DS9, I don't know. I do really like Captain Cisco. He's good. He's really good. He's like a very powerful character. Um, but there's just something like sinister and appealing about the character of Garrick. On the original series, I will say a super super soft spot for for Spock. Really, I love Spock because the thing with Spock, I mean, if you're enough of a nerd, as I happen to be, the thing with Spock is that, like, say in Next Generation, they say that his analog is Data. Data's an android, right? Spock is not an android. He's half Vulcan. And the thing is that with Vulcans, it's not that they don't have emotions. That's Data's whole thing. Data wants to get emotions, and when he does get them, it usually leads to bad outcomes. Um, but with a Vulcan, what they want to do is repress their emotions and contain them such that they don't act on them. And that's Spock's whole thing. It's not that he doesn't feel, he does, like intensely. He just doesn't act on it. Yeah. And so I would say for the earlier ones, this is going back to the motion picture. This is actually something that I really like about Spock. It's a powerful idea. I really think it is. About control, like whether or not that's the right thing to do. Because it's like him contrasted with a character like Dr. McCoy, who's very emotional, or Kirk, who is quite emotional. You know, what's the right way to do it? And the narrative does not tell you what the right way to do it is. It just presents you with options, which I think makes the whole thing actually a very intelligent thing, like literary object, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Um, the music,
The music is extraordinary.
Gene Roddenberry personally loved the main theme from the score so much that he reused it for Star Trek The Next Generation 1987
Yep,
and also reused it in Star Trek V Final Frontier 1989 after not
yep,
being used in the second, third, and fourth films.
yep. Yeah, no, the music in that movie is brilliant. I mean, I would give a little nod to Star Trek 4. I mean, Star Trek 4, they got a new score, which was a complete departure from the older scores, but that score is also very good. But they never used it again for anything.
The some more fun tidbits from the making of Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Um, Persis Kambata became very emotional about having her head shaved for her role in the film. She kept her shorn hair in a box for a amount of time and asked Gene Roddenberry to take out insurance in case her hair did not grow back. And her hair did wind up growing back.
She was a model, wasn't she?
I think so.
Like not like an actress. Yeah.
The hardest part for the cast to film, like the scene that was the most difficult, was the when the Enterprise descends into the VGR's layers of clouds, because the visual effects would be edited after the filming, so the cast was required to gaze in awe at blank screens for numerous takes.
I mean, that's not really that surprising. I mean, imagine like people on, in contemporary settings, right? Like when you have to do, say, an entire scene that's on a green screen or something, you will be expected to act like oh, like just pretend there's a goblin, and here's like a C stand with a tennis ball on it, like if that, if you're lucky.
Um, so I want to share this you know fun fact trivia. Almost all the dialogue in the Enterprise bridge scenes had to be dubbed by the actors in post production. This was basically because the animation graphics seen on the bridge station display monitors was projected from behind the bridge set walls by dozens of 16 millimeter projectors. One,
That's crazy.
one for each display screen. As computer technology was not advanced enough at that time, I guess they filmed it in 1978,
Yeah.
to use real computer monitors on a practical basis. So basically, as a result, the clattering sound of the noisy projectors nearly drowned out the voices of the actors, and their dialogue had to be dubbed over later at a considerable added time and expense.
That's wild. I had no idea. Wow.
I mean, there's something to be said for practical effects, whether it's the lighting, props, sets being built, like you said earlier, the VGR set. I mean, that was huge.
Yeah,
And
no, it's a gigantic thing with Spock going through all the things.
you mentioned earlier how in Star Trek there's no money. So
Yeah.
how do they conduct their lives without money?
Well, they're past money. I mean, that's like the cool, like I think one of the coolest parts about Star Trek is, well, how does that work? They never really answer that question. It's like, well, there's a replicator. You can, like replicate $100 if you want. Who cares? You know, nothing costs anything. It's the whole idea of post scarcity. And in that sense, it's, yeah, very utopian. But I think, and that comes from like a very kind of 60s place, I think. But not in like an unhealthy or bad way. It's actually a place that I sort of wish we could get back to. And when you look at like modern Star Trek, if you look at say like Star Trek Picard, like the new versions that they've made, they're so much darker. They're a lot darker. They're way more into conspiracies of like, oh, like, there's like dark elements in the Federation, and, you know, we need to go on the run or something. Like it it messes with that basic idea of a utopian future, you know, like Captain Kirk never thought about that stuff. Captain Kirk was just wandering around looking at stuff. But no, money was never a thing. If money ever comes up, the Federation will look at you like you're weird. Or if you do get money, it'll be like, oh yeah, like here, take it. Like, I don't care. I don't need it for anything anyway, which I think is an aspiration that we should all have, quite frankly.
Do you think what are the core values of Star Trek beyond the no money aspect?
It's
Like if somebody's
it's
never watched the show or seen the films, how would you describe the core values of Star Trek?
this one's easy. It's it's reason. First of all, if there's any sort of conflict, and like it's an episodic show in general, there's always going to be conflict of some kind. Someone gets lost or something goes wrong, whatever. How do you solve the problem? With reason. With reason and with science. And that's about it. I mean, other than that, I mean, the other thing, just in terms of like a value set, actually goes back to there's no money. Um, what your kind of what your rank is doesn't really matter. Whether or not you're in Starfleet or not, that doesn't matter. I mean, that you are alive matters, and that merits you the complete attention of, hey, like if we got to get you out of there, we will get you out of there. Like if something has gone wrong, then we will do everything within our power to make it right. Like there's one episode of Next Generation that I love that does this maybe to the furthest possible extent. It's Commander Riker. He gets kidnapped by an alien on a planet, but he doesn't know it because he's been put into a holographic projection of the Enterprise. So he thinks he's still on the Enterprise. And he goes and he, goes about his business. But after a while, things start going wrong. He figures it out. And he gets really mad. And he does things that you would never see him do. Like he yells at Captain Picard. He tells him to shut up. And this breaks the spell. It goes off, and then he goes into one projection, and then there's another projection. Anyway, it winds up, he's in this cave basement thing, with this little alien kid who generated the entire projection just so that he would have someone to play with. I mean, this is the sort of ethos of Star Trek that I actually kind of admire.
Is that the holodeck you're referring to, or is it a different thing?
Oh, in that episode, it's not the holodeck. In that episode, that alien has well, he has his own personal equivalent of a holodeck. However, the holodeck is an interesting idea in and of itself. Like, if a holodeck actually existed, I think lots of people would actually just go insane.
How would you describe the holodeck?
A holodeck is when you can go into a room that is a confined space, basically. It's called like a small sound stage. You go in there, but if you push the right buttons, it becomes infinite space. Like you could go sailing on the ocean in a holodeck. Like, or you could spend weeks or months in there. It's like people have problems with the internet now. If you gave them a holodeck, oh my God.
Are there parallels you would say, or is there symbolism to Plato's cave with what we're talking about?
With the holodeck? Well, I don't know. I mean, Plato's cave isn't really about that. Plato's cave is about being bound to an illusion. Plato's cave is about being bound to uh, a set of things that keep you from understanding the truth. Uh, the holodeck, I don't think does that. The the holodeck, I think, is a really big toy. Actually, like in Lower Decks. Do you know this show?
No, not specifically.
Oh, it's a the new one. It's a cartoon. It's basically like if you smashed Rick and Morty into Star Trek. It's actually really good. You might like it,
Okay.
but but they make but it's about the it's about the lower decks. It's about the ensigns. It's not about the chief staff. But they make jokes about cleaning up the holodeck, and they're like, no one wants to do it because, like, ew.
Are you familiar with the Ray Bradbury short story, science fiction short story, um, called The Velt? It was from September 1950, an issue of the Saturday Evening Post. It was republished in an anthology, The Illustrated Man. It's basically the story is a mother and a father struggle with their technologically advanced home, taking over their role as parents, and the children becoming unproductive as a result of their lack of discipline. There's like a virtual reality room, that's like realistically reproduces any place they imagine, and then they grow attached to it. The two children, Peter and Wendy. Have you heard about this short story?
No, I haven't,
It
but it sounds fascinating, actually.
it apparently influenced the holodeck origins, prior to Star Trek. Um, And, you know, it, I don't know if this is too deep a question for you, but it is philosophical in its nature of just like, what is reality? What is the nature of true reality? Is there such a thing? We do go to sleep at some point. We dream perhaps sometimes or every night. What would you, what would you say to that question?
Well, I mean, the holodeck is built to play with that question, right? What is real? What's not real? Like, are you sure? I mean, like they have episodes where it ends with there's one character who winds up getting confused about whether or not he's still in the holodeck or not. You know, like, am I back on the ship? Am I back in the real world? Or is this all still some kind of a simulation? Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the idea that the concept is built to play with. What is reality? Um, I think I think reality is that which has the possibility of helping other people. Uh, reality is that which has the possibility of harming other people. Uh, reality is that which you can change to the point. Sorry, I'm trying to put this right. It's that which is malleable such that you can generally make the world better. In a simulation, I don't think these things are the case because it's just the program, and you're not in control of the program.
Is there anything else about Star Trek before we adjourn that we should say or that you want to include, or whether it's about the motion picture, the ideas, the creativity put into it?
I Yes. Okay. It basically just that I think Star Trek motion picture doesn't really get enough credit. It's extremely beautiful. The score is amazing. The cast is amazing. The costumes are ridiculous. However, everything else is good. And it's actually not that slow. Like, if you watch it and you're paying attention, the pacing is not slow. The pacing is just it follows the tempo of that story, and it's all right. You know, it's okay. That's why it takes Spock like halfway through the movie to show up, you know. And then once he's there, it takes him a while to even do anything, you know. And then when he does get there, he's part of one of the most spectacular sequences in the whole thing, you know, visually speaking. I mean, you know, like he doesn't do much except like sit in a spacesuit and push a button. But I mean, it's still like it looks really cool. And it's a space movie. I mean, that's what it's supposed to be doing, you know? Uh, yeah, I think in general it's underappreciated. I mean, spoilers. I mean, the that it's a probe from Earth is it's kind of a goofy conclusion, but sure, whatever. I mean, again, it doesn't really have to make sense. It's science fiction. Anyway, I just it's always been a personal favorite and one that I think is underappreciated.
One of my closing comments, thank you for everything you've shared today. One of my takeaways, or I would say I admire about Star Trek, is the way it's like you have the humans, the aliens, you have all these different kinds of people, types of people or beings or life forms, and this energy, all this life, like and somehow, they're working towards like these kinds of things of like um taking care of the planet, taking care of each other,
Oh,
um
for sure. I mean,
trying to help
that's
each
like
other.
the it's one of the really nice things about Star Trek, right? It's not even like the aspiration towards peaceful cohabitation. It's the assumption that it's already been achieved.
um Thanks everybody, I want to say, for tuning in. If you have a request for a movie to, that I should cover on an episode, info@jeffmgiordano.com. I'll put a link for the contact in the description of the video. Um, Thank you for tuning in, listening. I hope you learned some things about Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and we'll see you next time.